Next up to the stage is Anika Lopes. She is the founder and director of Ancestral Bridges Foundation, a nonprofit based in Amherst, dedicated to uncovering and celebrating the obscured and lesser-known Black and Afro-Indigenous roots of Amherst through the revitalization of archives with oral stories from original inhabitants and their descendants. As a descendant-led living archive and cultural anchor and museum, the Ancestral Bridges builds and supports projects, exhibitions, and educational programs that pay tribute to the arts, history, and culture of Black and Afro-Indigenous populations in the Connecticut River Valley and honors this legacy of Amherst and the region. Anika is a professional milliner, creative director, and culture bearer. Locally, she has served on the Amherst Town Council and currently holds positions with the Massachusetts Cultural Council and boards of the Family Outreach of Amherst and the Amherst Business Improvement District. Please welcome Anika Lopes. Share some of the impacts and consequences, intended or not, of the work. Like, what has changed, if anything, since 2022?
Thank you. Thank you all for this invitation, and thank you, cousin. So a lot has changed since 2022. Actually, from 2021, just to back up, that exhibit that you're talking about was really inspired because with all of the history, the rich Black and Afro-Indigenous history in Amherst, that 2022 was the first time that these faces of the Black and Afro-Indigenous community that has existed in Amherst since before the establishment of the town was on the walls in the Amherst History Museum. And the first time that this history and stories had been brought forward by descendants. So it has really been an incredible ride since then, because at that time, many of our ancestors, many of our elders that we have in existence, we have this gap. So there were many people in their 90s who had been doing the work of documenting our stories for decades and centuries, had passed on or retired. So there had really been this lull, and in the area, there was this narrative going around that the Black history of the area had been established in the 70s, and anyone who was there before was really brought in from the college or the university. So we were able to really connect that no, this was a whole big vibrant community that is not only there in Amherst, but again, because it extends beyond the establishment of the town, this is really a story of the valley. So I think that what has been most imperative since then is we've really been able to infuse descendants, and more important than us here today sitting here are the voices and accounts from our ancestors who really do tell the story and had never been brought to the center to tell this story before then.
Thank you. Do you want to tell us more about Ancestral Bridges before we talk about some of the work that you do as a historian?
So Ancestral Bridges is really a work that I'm really just honored and to play a part of. We are very lucky that we have, for instance, descendants that lived over 100 years. My great-grandfather, Gil Roberts, lived to be 106. So he was born in 1896 in a home that his father built on Hazel Avenue. His father was born enslaved in Maryland at Rye Plantation, but this is where Frederick Douglass was as well, but also connecting with some of the folks that, if you all have heard of Porter Phelps Huntington Museum, some of those folks who were enslaved there also connect with us. We also represent folks who were removed from displacement, right? So it's, I've learned from all of my ancestors that it's so important to realize when you're talking about Afro-Indigenous folks that regardless of the existence of a council or a government, thinking about ways in which we were erased. So the non-existence of a tribe, so to speak, does not equate to the erasure or the extinction of the people. So this has been a work that was really handed down. As a child, I didn't know we were history because I just lived in this every day in these streets that we talk about. So I pretty much inherited this from my grandfather, who was one of the last to keep an amazing amount of recordings. Some are ancient, archives, letters, and so it was just really my privilege to honor a promise that I made before his death, that I would ensure that this history would be out there front and center, not just for our family, but more importantly for the region and for generations to come. And so that is the business that we got down to right away for Ancestral Bridges, and I'm just really grateful of the support, though it's challenging, very challenging, though the support that we have received to anchor it today and really bring forward the first space in Amherst to bring forward this history through descendants and first-person account.
Thank you. So one of the things that came up during our discussion earlier as we talked about uncovering stories was migration patterns, and how there were different towns that people would come across the same person, but it was a different town. So when conducting research, why is it important to consider how political and geographical boundaries affected people's lives, including enslaved individuals seeking freedom, as well as the importance of understanding the complex migration patterns and the presence of indigenous people in those areas?
I think this is one of the ways that we can track and map people, is really one of our strongest tools in facing erasure head on. When we think about how small, just, for instance, in 1893 in the Amherst area, there was only about 99 of us, right? Speaking of movement, I had recently been sent a box that I have goosebumps to talk to you. I think you are the first folks that I've talked publicly about this, that we found a box that is over a century old that was hidden in my great-grandmother's armoire on Snell Street in Amherst, which is part of the West Side Historic District. And this box contains over 100 letters that were written by my great-grandfather to his wife throughout the span of 1920 through 1934. This was when he was traveling. We know that he was, a renowned jazz musician. He traveled all over Europe and Egypt. But these letters allow us to meet him as a young man. By the time I was born, he was 75, and I was very fortunate to be with him nearly every day of my life. He's one of the first people to hold me on the night I was born, and constantly would tell me his stories. But this was meeting him as a young man, and just hearing his challenges of the valley, how hard, how difficult it was, how people are leaving their homes, right? We know that we have enslaved individuals, and instead of just seeing them in an archive and their name written, he's talking about his father. He's getting correspondence from his father. What I was most surprised at, just the movement. There's people are moving to Buffalo, they're moving to Holyoke, men are leaving to find work. And so there are a lot of us who were, whether they were coming to Holyoke, to Springfield, to be with other community that were around to help them out. But it also shows how, there was housing open to welcome folks who were coming in from the South during active enslavement, right? How they were being held. This causes attention to how obscured and ridiculous some of the censuses that we have are. They look at homes and say, this is a 3-4 bedroom home. We're going to say this was one family. Not happening. Many of these people did not have means. We were not wealthy people at all. So there would oftentimes be, numerous families in a home. Right? So we are able to see this and rethink this narrative and a telling of our stories that we've never been in the forefront of. They're told by everyone but us, and usually through dry, dull archives, void of life or any tick. So these letters tell a story not just of hardship, because there is, I just made a dent. I mean, a little teeny dent. I shouldn't even call it a dent. But in that, I've seen stories of housing discrimination, medical discrimination of the worst kind, right? But I see joy. You know, I see people talking about what's going on. I see innovation, you know, so there's so much in these stories, and I think that this, along with much of the work that has been done, is going to help us really reclaim this story and how we're told we're not there to be paralleled in this story. It's always told for us. Our life is not there. So I think really looking at how and where and why people were moving is imperative to tell these stories right.
Thank you for that. And as you said, that there were names or the census or other things that are in archives, that was a topic that came up as well, and sort of like the idea of oral stories and community narratives versus archives, and history discredits oral stories, particularly from those of historically and purposely marginalized communities, right, are heavily relying on the archives or records. So how do we reconcile this, particularly as the nation prepares to celebrate the 250th?
Well, I like to always say, you know, in the years coming up to this, I don't know what is revolutionary about any history that parallels and includes enslavement and displacement. So we have that. And there's also, I always love to nod to the Met takeover, right? I mean, sometimes you just need to do it and tell the stories, but also recognizing really that for Black and Afro-Indigenous and Indigenous people, we're often like, we were not meant to know our histories. You know, we're not meant to be here, right? We're certainly not meant to be the authorities on it. And we've known this. So we knew we had this like extraordinary record of oral history. But there's always this, oh, is this so? And do you really know? How do you know this? What makes you an authority? So, I mean, we have had people, we've got the genealogists, historians for decades and decades who have been like, they go with our triangle. I always like to say, just to back up, that it is really through and only through Native American, European American, and African American history that we get to American history, and then throughout to our global history. But if we're not acknowledging that we have an extra challenge. So we have the people that they go to England, they go to wherever country, city, state, town that we're said to be, and whether they've spent decades or 3 hours, and often it's decades, to find one correspondence that links to that oral history and corrects it. You know, that's what we do. And where it is, you know, it's really frustrating sometimes that we have to do that. I do understand accuracy, as our history is so obscured all over the place. People can say and write anything, and we're seeing this all over the place, whether that is support or erase. But I think on a positive note, there are so many of us, like look at all of you here, and if we're just talking about Massachusetts, like I can't imagine that there aren't many places that these stories connect, right? So I think to keep in touch with each other, to keep in community with each other, to looking at each other's stories and see where there are parallels, whether they connect or whether we can help each other out, to remain at the forefront and show that, you know, our oral history, that is our history. You know, that's where the arts are. You know, I mean, the arts, and you know, as many globally in Indigenous languages, there's no word really for art. It's just in our being and how we do things, right? So it's in the problem, and it's in the solution, and it's in the beauty, and it's in the pain. And I think this is just all helpful to keep at the forefront.
Thank you for sharing that. I just have maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll start fielding questions from the audience. And so you talked about how we're all here in this one room, right? And we have this commonality, and like we love this stuff, right? Like we love listening to other people talk, we love sharing with each other. And another thing that came up in one of our conversations as we talked about some of the challenges of doing this work and elevating these stories is the engagement piece. Like, how do we get other people outside of us who live this and breathe this, how do we get them to be interested in hearing these stories that we're trying to elevate?
Well, I always like to share with people that it wasn't just, us and relatable folks who were robbed of their history. It's everyone, This is all of our histories. You were all robbed of a history. If you're learning that there were, and there has always been, Black people in Massachusetts, since before Massachusetts, like you've been robbed, right? If you don't know that we are the pulse, right, of the nation in so many ways, you've been robbed. So I think that this is just who doesn't want to have a more expansive, knowledgeable view and history and perspective of where they are. Be this where you're from, where you're passing through, where you've recently made home, right? And also there's so much that we can learn. This box of letters that we've just scratched the surface of, they are more relevant to today than most things that I have read recently. So we're able to see, we're able to pivot, and hopefully we're able to learn from this in so many ways. Because if we're not going to figure out ways of connection, like we're not getting out of this, and we're going to find ourselves having these same conversations in another 10, 20 years, or whenever this administration changes over.
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to save my question for last, but we can definitely take some audience questions. Reshma has the microphone if anyone has a question for Anika.
Thank you so much. And I just want to know, how are you interacting with the K through 12 in our public schools? Because what you just said resonated with me so much, and just thinking about, high school students learning about their own ancestry and how it's connected, no matter what our ethnicity. That's a place to move forward, I think.
Well, thank you for that. So we are a very small team, but I'm very excited that we have a younger person on this. We have a wonderful new addition who was a recent graduate from Brown with us, and I'm happy to share that she is going to do our first elementary school presentation tomorrow. And she really has just such a way of making history not only accessible but manageable throughout the audience that it is. So we had recently, which we have an ongoing exhibit that talks about celebrating Black and Afro-Indigenous history and culture through the art of millinery in Amherst. And like many of the factories here, there was a hat factory that was a #1 employer in the area before the college and university. And we had an exhibit that was spaced out around town that told the story through hats. And at one of our locations was a toy store called the Toy Box. And so we ended up having this penguin who had a hat. And so Christina has named the penguin Chester, and Chester has goes all around the places. So she's going to be bringing this forward to K through 6 tomorrow. And helping them to be engaged with this history there. We usually draw them in through manageable, exciting, youth-friendly stories, but then we kind of get them in and they think, well, this is just really a fun scavenger hunt, but it's actually, we're trying to get, even if we have 2 important facts that we want you to leave with for them to retain and share with their youth. So. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So Congratulations on finding that trove, the box of letters. That's really remarkable. How do you talk to people, young people, all people, when you're talking about archival stuff? How do you talk about objects? I mean, I like that you asked us to bring objects today, but I think about the disappearance of some of that. I mean, we don't print pictures anymore. We barely write letters. So how do you talk to folks about that?
Thank you for the question, and let me know if I'm not following you. But we're very fortunate to have many artifacts that we recognize that many people do not have due to, could be gentrification, fires. We have tons of historic photos, but these things do not last. So even the box of letters that we have, had my great-grandmother ever got irritated with my great-grandfather tossing these out, we wouldn't have them, right? So we make sure that we share with people and try to make what we have as accessible as possible, but also we like to let people know, we consider what your archives are, because sometimes people will see ours and they'll say, oh my gosh, we don't have this. You know, how could we ever tackle something like this? Same with museums. So we like to let people know, your grandmother's teacup is your artifact. You know, the card that they sent you, their jacket, their hat. You know, you have something that is survived and that is for you, and that's for you to tell, and that's for you to claim as your artifact and your archives, as opposed to fitting into what someone else documented about your history and decided what is an artifact.
Love that. I just want to add to that, in place of Erica, even though she's not here. She was on another panel of ours, and she kind of addressed that question about like how we're living history, and her advice was to get yourself a fireproof box and start collecting these things, because all of these things are history. And so that impacted me and just made me start holding on to little things, and when I'm not here, who will know these things, or also the people we have questions about that we don't have these things for. So I love that idea of we are already living history, and these small things matter. But that was one of the pieces of advice she said, and that if we're at a hangout and Uncle so-and-so starts talking, pull out the camera, yes. Right? Because you can always upload it to a drive, or you can save it to, in multiple ways. But that's where the oral storytelling is taking place, when we're hanging out at, the barbecue, and then somebody starts going on and on about when they were 5 or what happened in the old days. And that's also a way to collect oral stories in real time.
I totally agree, and also record yourself, because if we're all fortunate enough, you will be the archives, right?
Yeah. I'm just curious how you're bringing sort of your stories of the Valley and the stories that you're teasing out to broader audiences, if that's part of your mission, and this moment of the revolutionary moment, is that doing anything for you, or are there other opportunities that you're seeing to kind of bring, get the bigger audience in the Valley to pay attention to the work that you're doing? How are you getting the stories out there?
Thank you. So again, we're new, and we're a small organization, but we do have a physical location in Amherst, which is open to the public. Our stories are getting out there. We do have partnerships where we're in the curriculum now with Amherst College. We had our first collaborative course with a Professor Lisa Brooks at Amherst, and that will be coming again for another iteration. And so we do have quite a few college students that come in and classes, and really it's the they give me life. It's really this youth and this generation that are out there, like when they hear these stories, they're bringing them forward.
How do I make my voice something where it is heard and be a representation for my people, women of color and just women in general? And then also, like second or third question, how do you let the heaviness go at night? It's a lot. So yeah, how do you let that go? Or I guess maybe, I know we live with it, but how do we breathe through it in a practical manner?
Question.
Yes, right. Excellent question. I want to tell you, first of all, congratulations to you. And I also want to tell you that no one can tokenize you as long as you remember you are the prize, right? You are the prize, and you're there for a reason. I went to the New School as an undergrad. I was at Eugene Lang and Parsons, and I ended up in internships where I was the only person who looked like me in rooms where people, don't make sure this person's coming in, don't make eye contact. And I'm always a person. I'm always that one, but I realized that if I didn't say something, right? If I didn't go back to the director of the internships and say, there is no one who looks like me, I should back up and realize I had learned that people had thought, oh, this is an artist, she's not gonna make a fuss, she's safe to bring over there. But I got in and realized that there was an opportunity and also a responsibility to speak up. And if you're going to be the first in a room, I say embrace it, right? And to think about how many of our ancestors had to be the first in rooms and sometimes didn't make it out of those rooms to talk about it and have a voice, or how many of their ideas and contributions were credited to someone else, right? So I think you should own every room you're in, and I'm glad that you're there. And yeah, please feel free to keep in touch if you have any other questions. I'd love to know your journey. This is incredibly, I think, heavy work. I think whether we are connected to the people we're talking about or not, it's heavy. When you live in a space where you're, just constantly subjected to hatefulness that people have around you, even at our space, we have a doorbell now because the hateful emails and messages are real. So it's just, these are things that we do to, in a way, safeguard ourselves. We also deal with, because, I think in many ways of the challenges that come with this history being at the forefront in some areas right now, people get really excited, and sometimes, we end up dealing with well-meaning individuals that further obscure the history, or further take someone away from the tree, and it can kind of feel like a whack-a-mole all the time, or, so I try my best to breathe through it. I try to check in on myself and be like, am I holding my breath, am I breathing? And one thing that I feel that moves me is movement and dance. Like, music is like the one place that I can be in that it shuts my mind down. I'm not really that person that if I tell myself sit and meditate, that doesn't really work. My mind will go more. But I do notice that, like, when there's music, oh my gosh, this is when I can let things go. I can be replenished. I can feel creative, and it's important, as we are always in these positions where we can be like we're on display, right? We have to hold in whether it's like offenses or stress, and it's so important, I think, for us to feel like we're doing what they tell you when you go on a flight. You know, are you putting on your mask first, your oxygen mask, before you can help someone else? So I think doing what works for you to be able to feel like you're able to be at peace and be a human being who can put down defending yourself in this world because of the color of your skin, you know, or your lineage, and to just be and get in touch with yourself and what brings you joy is so important. So for me, it is music and dancing and trying to get more sleep than I do, but that's not the successful one.
Ooh, great advice.
What about you?
I feel the same. You just said everything I said. I always try to find something that brings me joy every day. I also remind myself I get to choose the load, like what I want to carry, whether that's the opinions or expectations of other people. I get to decide whether I want to carry it. And so when I find myself carrying it, I'm like, why are you carrying this, right? And also sometimes learning not to sort of internalize every single thing, right? Which it also can be difficult because we do have visceral responses. But again, it's like, do I need to take this on? Why am I taking this on? And why, if somebody has an opinion about me, why do I need to take that on? Most of the time, no. And also in showing up and being your authentic self is going to be important, because then it shows other people that there isn't just one kind of blackness or one kind of woman or one kind of black woman. So showing up and being your authentic self gives other people a chance to see that there's other ways, and you're going to be judged regardless. So if you show up and you act the way that you think you're supposed to act and speak the way people are still going to pass judgment. So you might as well show up and just be who you are. And then the last thing is really focusing on, like, I always talk about like the circle of influence or power and control, right? Like you think about what do I have control over? That's what I'm going to focus on, right? And then I'm going to decide with my energy that I have left over, like where do I want to use my influence? Because influence means I can put it out there, people don't have to necessarily take it. And then the stuff outside of my control, I kind of disconnect from that, because there's nothing I can do about certain things. And so for me to not take care of myself because I'm so worried about the things I can't control, then I'm no service in the places where I can influence. So that's all I have. So I have one last question, because I know we want to honor our time, and I know folks have to get back on the road. And so before I ask that question, I want to remind you that please, one, make sure that, take a little snack for the road for those of us who have driven distances. Two, we also have a QR code at the door that is going to lead you to our survey. I'll also send it in an email too, but if you want to get started today, while the memories are fresh, you can scan it there. I'll also send the collective poem as well, so that we can have that as a memory of today. We will be reaching out about how we will continue to collectively do the work. There is some time after to kind of hang around, so don't feel like you have to leave immediately. We have a little bit of flex time, so if you want to like take pictures of this, we'll be sharing these too, but make those connections, so spend that time after this to do that. And my last question is that at Mass Humanities, we say that we champion storytellers. So if you could leave us all with one piece of advice as storytellers and listeners, what would it be?
I really appreciate what you just said about being your authentic self, right? And embracing that you are the story, right? And letting that come through. And I think also realizing that you are enough, and it's there. I know for myself, I think about where the stories that I heard come from. I remind myself when I'm telling a story that I've not only, I've heard this story throughout my life since I was, 5 years old. I am an expert on it, and I'm bringing it forward, right? And I always check with the elders that we have, that we are the story, right? And I think that that is important. Like you are the story, right? And I'm, really thankful for you, Cousin Latoya, and everyone here at Mass Humanities for uplifting the storytellers and recognizing who they are and digging deeper to find them.